On the storm-lashed coast of Oregon, whispers tell of a light that never dies. Perched upon jagged cliffs, a lantern hangs suspended, defying time itself. It once belonged to a woman who waited for her husband at sea. He never returned, but the lantern has never gone dark, burning each night like a beacon for those who have lost their way. Fishermen murmur that anyone who gazes upon its glow will hear a tender voice calling, luring them into the depths from which none ever return. One day, Margaret, a folklorist, walked through the skin-cutting cold of the Oregon coast. In her hand was a weathered leather journal, filled with fragments of legends she had gathered across the Pacific Northwest. But this time was different. No mere rumor or fireside tale. The lantern she sought, they whispered, still burned in truth. The path to the cliff twisted upward, the earth soft and slick with sea mist. Her boots sank into mud flecked with gravel, sliding with every step. Below, the ocean thundered against the rocks, its roar merging with the shriek of the wind. A grim symphony, like the ocean's own mournful breath. With every step, she felt herself drawn closer to something that did not belong to the world of the living. As the shadows thickened, Margaret saw it. Upon a sheer outcrop, untouched by human hand, a lantern burned. Its flame, golden and flickering, did not falter in the gale, as though shielded by an unseen hand. From afar, its glow was a lone, unblinking eye piercing the dark, at once inviting and threatening. Margaret froze, her skin rising in prickling waves. The impossibility of it all rattled her. No path led to that cliff. No hand could have placed the lantern there. Yet its light remained undeniable, brighter even, as her gaze fixed upon it. For an instant, she swore she saw a figure behind the flame. A slender woman's silhouette, her hair whipping wild in the wind. A coldness surged through Margaret, seeping from her knees to the soles of her feet. She drew a breath, but the air was too thick, too salt-heavy, as if the sea itself was swallowing her lungs. Her pulse hammered, and a single question carved itself into her mind. Was this legend come alive, or had she stepped across a threshold no human should ever cross? Beneath the cliff, the surf screamed white and merciless. Yet above that chaos, the lantern burned in calm defiance, untouched by nature's fury. Margaret opened her journal, but her pen trembled. The ink scrawled crooked as though the storm itself wrested the words from her hand. All else sank into shadow. Only the lantern's light remained, like the beating heart of night, a secret beacon summoning her closer. In that moment, Margaret knew research was no longer her only reason to go on. Another force, deeper and more perilous, had taken root within her. She had to see the lantern with her own eyes, and learn why it had never gone dark. Night along the Oregon coast was a suffocating shroud, a black veil without a single tear. The crash of waves rose from the abyss below, mingling with the lash of wind against the cliffs, as if thousands of unseen whips cracked in the dark. Yet through the frozen void, the lantern still burned, unmoved by storm, untouched by reason. Margaret stood transfixed, her eyes bound to its glow. She realized the light was no longer fixed. The lantern shifted slowly along the cliff's edge, each quivering shimmer like the fading imprint of invisible footsteps. No wind could carry a lantern in such a way. No rope could draw it forward. It moved of its own will. The sky, strangled by heavy cloud, gave no light of its own, yet the lantern, cast a pallid trail across the coastal path. The glow wavered, brushing over slick moss and jagged stone, forming a fractured passage through the dark. Margaret found her feet already moving, unaware she had begun to follow. Each step sent loose rock tumbling into the chasm, their echoes joining the sea's roar, like the drumbeat of a funeral march from the deep. The lantern drifted farther, yet never vanished from sight. It kept its distance, always just beyond reach, close enough to lure, far enough to forbid. Its glow painted grotesque forms upon the cliff walls, long, grasping arms, twisted faces half buried in seaweed, all leaning toward her, aching to touch. The air grew colder. Mist clung to her clothes, seeping into her skin. Her steps grew heavy, but the compulsion within her only sharpened. In her chest, her heartbeat matched the lantern's wavering pulse, as though her body had been drawn into its breath. A violent wave crashed below, spraying white salt into the air. Through that drifting haze, Margaret glimpsed her. The slender figure of a woman, hair in wild disarray, dress pale and fluttering like a torn shroud. Margaret shut her eyes, but when she opened them, only the lantern remained, floating like a phantom that knew its way home. The coastal path narrowed, crumbling stone leaving barely a strip wide enough for a footfall. Beneath lay the black abyss, where waves struck the cliff face like 1,000 hands pounding at a wall. The lantern did not slow. It led on, patient, unyielding, drawing Margaret deeper into the dark that swallowed all things. She could no longer tell whether she heard the thunder of the sea or the blood rushing in her ears. Each time she faltered, the lantern flared violently, its glow throbbing like an enraged heart, before gliding forward again, forcing her to follow. For one terrifying instant, Margaret felt her body was no longer her own, dragged onward like driftwood in a whirlpool. At last, the lantern came to rest upon a jagged outcrop above the sea. It hung in the air, no rope, no chain, burning calm and defiant against the howling gale. Waves below burst into white foam, circling the cliff in a ritual rhythm. Margaret stopped, her body soaked through, yet her eyes could not break away from that light. In that moment she understood. The lantern did not guide towards safety. It led elsewhere, to a threshold between sea and night, a place where a person could be erased from the world, leaving not a single trace behind. On the outcrop that jutted into the sea, the lantern still burned, bright, suspended like a beating heart against the void. Margaret stood motionless, her body drenched in mist and salt spray, her eyes locked upon the shimmering flame. Around her, the world began to change. The roar of wind and wave ebbed away, replaced by something softer, an indistinct murmur rising from the depths of the ocean. At first the voice was fragile, no louder than breath. Then it swelled, resonant, filling the air. A melody slow and mournful, a funeral lullaby echoing through the night. Each note slid along Margaret's spine like a blade of ice, making her shiver, yet binding her inescapably. The song coiled around her mind, sweet in its hypnosis, dissolving the fragile line between reason and delirium. Below, the waves began to shift. Their rhythm aligned with the voice, as though the entire ocean had become its orchestra. Each surge, each shattering crash against the cliffs, deepened the lament, layering it with the resonance of 1,000 drowned throats. Margaret clutched her chest, her breath unsteady. She knew she was hearing something that did not belong to this world, yet her soul yearned for it. The song no longer surrounded her. It seemed to resound from within her ribcage, pulling her into its harmony. The fog, thickening around the outcrop, began to swirl, spinning in slow, spectral circles beneath the lantern's glow. In the mist, Margaret glimpsed drifting shapes, arms reaching upward, hair streaming and sodden, eyes wide and frantic in silent pleas. They dissolved into the melody, vanishing into the sorrowful chorus of the unseen. The lantern's flame pulsed with the music, flashing brighter with each rise of the voice. Every flicker felt like a signal, a heartbeat of the sea itself, seducing her soul. Margaret's feet moved toward the cliff's edge, step by step, though her mind screamed in resistance. The rock beneath her boots was slick, cold, treacherous, but she could not stop. When the song reached its crescendo, the heavens tore open in a slash of lightning. For an instant, the storm illuminated her. A woman's figure, slim, draped in white, her dark hair whipped into a tangle by the sea wind. She stood still amid the fog, facing Margaret. Her face was veiled in shadow, but her presence radiated an eternal grief. Margaret trembled, her eyes wide with horror. She knew she was beholding the living witness, or rather, the lingering soul, of the legend. The woman needed no gesture, no beckoning hand. The song was her summons, binding Margaret's heart, her feet, pulling her inch by inch toward the brink. A colossal wave rose, shattering into spray that mingled with the dirge. In that moment, Margaret felt herself poised on the threshold, between land and sea, life and death, flesh and phantom. The lantern still burned, unwavering, the single eye of the widow fixed upon her every step. The song was no longer music. It had become command, an invisible tether coiling around Margaret's soul, dragging her away from the world she once knew. Ye. The lantern trembled softly in the night, its glow no longer a simple flame, but a vein of molten blood coursing through the dark. The sea groaned below the cliff, each crashing wave a funeral drumbeat, carrying the dirge that filled the air. Margaret stood trembling, her eyes wide as the figure in the white dress emerged in sharp relief within the whirling fog. She stood upright, motionless, on the precipice where no human could stand. The long white dress, torn and stained with dark streaks, as if soaked in salt and blood from ages past, whipped violently in the wind. Black hair clung in tangled strands, yet could not veil the face that revealed itself. Pale as bone, its skin tinted with a deathly green, eyes hollow, yet glimmering as though reflecting the entire sea at night. Margaret's body locked in place, every muscle seized in terror. The song no longer rose from the ocean depths, but from the woman's own chest. Each note pulsed into the air, cracking the black sky to reveal ghastly streaks of pallid green light, like drowned corpses adrift beneath water. Shapes in the fog, arms, hair, faceless visages, floated toward her, winding around her like a living funeral shroud. Beside her, the lantern blazed brighter than ever. Its light clamped down on Margaret's gaze, forcing her to witness the spectacle. The woman tilted her head, lips parting, and from them unspooled a thin ribbon of black smoke. It curled into the wind, spilling downward across the cliffside, cloaking the very path Margaret had taken. Every escape was sealed. Only one way remained, forward toward the abyss. Fog swirled tighter around her, the salt-heavy stench choking her lungs. She staggered, desperate to turn back. But her feet were soldered to the cold stone. Each attempt to lift them was shredded by the rising song. cutting her will apart like fabric torn by a blade. The rhythm of the waves below fused perfectly with the hammer of her heart, until Margaret no longer felt she belonged to herself. The woman in white slowly raised her hand. The motion was delicate, almost tender, like an invitation, but it carried the weight of a command no mortal could resist. At once the lantern flared, flooding the cliff with a blinding gold as if a dead sun had erupted before her. In its glare, Margaret glimpsed another vision. Dozens, no, hundreds, of figures sinking into the water, their hands reaching in vain toward the shore, their eyes hollow, pleading, unredeemed. Shaken to her core, she could not look away. The lantern and the woman fused into a single hypnotic point, swallowing everything else. Wind shrieked, waves burst in white fury, but all was nothing more than accompaniment to the mournful hymn that would not end. In that moment, Margaret understood. She had been called, not by voice, but by soul. The woman needed no step forward, no touch of hand. The song and the light had done all. She simply stood there, a lighthouse of darkness, guiding the doomed into the sea. And Margaret, though she knew she was standing at a threshold from which no return was possible, could not resist. Neolao. Margaret stood at the cliff's edge, her breath ragged, mingling with the freezing mist. Below, the ocean yawned open like a colossal mouth, eager to devour any soul who strayed too near. Waves pounded in relentless fury, spraying white foam that rose like hundreds of grasping hands from the abyss. The woman in the white dress remained still, her hollow eyes blazing, locking onto Margaret's soul. The song endured, no longer music but a chain, an invisible binding that shackled her body. The lantern flared violently, its beam burning through her, scorching away the final flicker of resistance. Margaret felt her feet take one step, then another. The path back was gone. Each frozen breath coiled in her lungs, each slowing heartbeat fused with the rhythm of the sea. She knew that with another step, there would be no return. But her body no longer obeyed reason. She was nothing more than driftwood, carried on a current she could not fight. A violent gust swept over the cliff, carrying with it the stench of rotting seaweed. The heavens quaked with thunder, and in the lightning's flash Margaret saw faces, strangers she had never known, their eyes all the same, empty, despairing, sinking slowly into the black sea. Their shapes drifted toward the woman in white, dissolving into the darkness that surrounded her, leaving only a muffled echo like cries silenced beneath water. The lantern shook violently, its flame surging upward into a pillar of fire against the storm. Its blaze was no warning, it was triumph, the sick exaltation of a ritual centuries old. Margaret stretched out her arms, entranced, and hurled herself into the light. In the moment her body tipped forward into the abyss, all sound ceased. Only the last echo of her heartbeat remained, absorbed into the unholy hymn. She plunged, the ocean slicing her skin like shards of glass. And before the darkness swallowed her whole, Margaret looked upward and saw the lantern, shrinking, vanishing into the storm above. The next morning the sea lay still, as though nothing had happened. An old fisherman, steering his boat toward open water, glanced up at the cliff. He froze. The lantern burned brighter than ever before, still alight even beneath the rising sun. Its glow seemed stronger now, fierce and unyielding, as though it had been fed a new soul. In the fishing village, a young girl who had once heard the legend saw it too. the flickering flame in the fog, whispering names of the lost. Any who lingered too long felt a faint, mournful song in the wind, soft yet unforgettable. No one ever found where Margaret had gone. Her weathered leather journal was never recovered. Only the lantern remained, burning brighter than ever, a testament that one more soul had joined the choir beneath the sea. And from that night onward, whoever gazed into its glow could never be certain they would return. The lantern, the immortal heart of the widow, would never go out. Niwa Awa. In the outskirts of New England, whispers tell of a creature once buried beneath the ancient forest, a being they call Labu. No one knows where it truly came from, a banished monster from another world, or the spawn of age-old nightmares. But one thing is certain, it never dies. Anyone who hears the chattering grind of its teeth in the dark vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only bones gnawed clean and a strange glimmering tooth that seems disturbingly alive. The old wooden cabin lay deep within the New England forest, where Marjorie Hale and her son Ethan had just moved after years of being pressed into the chaos of city life. Marjorie hoped this remote refuge might soothe the wounds carved into them both, the boy still drowning in the loss of his father, and herself, brittle with grief. Yet from the moment they stepped inside, the air carried a weight that could not be explained away. The walls sagged with rot, flaking paint, peeling like shriveled skin. The floor groaned beneath each step, as if resenting their presence. Beyond the windows, the forest loomed like an endless wall, its branches intertwined, stretching outward like massive hands intent on blocking any escape. Marjorie whispered reassurance inside her own mind, telling herself it was only the strangeness of a new place. But deep within, she recognized that the silence here was not peace. It was a breath held too long, waiting to break. On their first night, the wind shrieked through the cracks, carrying with it the damp stench of rotting leaves. Marjorie lay awake on the ancient bed, eyes wide against the dark. Then, from somewhere within the forest, came a sound. A brittle clicking, the unmistakable gnash of teeth, near, then far, then suddenly rasping right against the window pane. In the room beside hers, Ethan shifted in his sleep, his small bed rattling as if footsteps circled around it. Marjorie held her breath, heart hammering in her chest, as a single thought gnawed at her mind. The tranquility she had sought was nothing but a fragile veil, stretched thin over a nightmare waiting to be awakened. Nishie. The next morning, a heavy fog smothered the forest, swallowing the sun as though it had never risen. Marjorie awoke exhausted, her mind still echoing with the brittle grinding of teeth from the night before. Ethan sat motionless at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his expression so empty it was impossible to guess what he had endured in the dark. While cleaning, Marjorie discovered a strange mark on the porch, deep, parallel gouges as though something had clawed through the wood with dozens of sharp talons. Wedged within the splintered cracks, something glimmered. She pried it loose, a long, unnaturally pointed tooth, its surface slick and gleaming, cold as steel. She slipped it into her pocket before Ethan could notice, though a creeping dread gnawed at her chest. That afternoon, she resolved to learn more about the land they had come to. In the small town's general store, locals turned wary and evasive at the mention of her new address. Only one woman responded, an ancient figure seated in the corner, her tangled silver hair framing eyes that seemed to sink into darkness. She called herself Hazel, the oldest surviving resident of the town. Her voice carried no emotion, as though reciting a curse. The forest had once been marked by an ancient being, one the native people had named in a trembling whisper. Labu. It was neither animal nor spirit, but a living entity that fed upon human souls. Those who heard the gnashing of its teeth would soon see, in their dreams, a smile stretched grotesquely from ear to ear. And once it appeared in a dream, escape was no longer possible. Marjorie left the store with her hands trembling, her coat pocket heavy with a sharp, unnatural tooth. Hazel's warning rang in her mind like metal scraping against metal. She did not want to believe it, yet denial was impossible. The silence of the forest was nothing more than a shroud, hiding something that had been waiting far too long. Janie, Eldigai. Night fell faster than usual, darkness swallowing the last streaks of color along the horizon. Marjorie sat at her desk, struggling to focus on the page before her. But her thoughts never drifted far from the gleaming tooth. It lay in the drawer, yet seemed to whisper into the silence, a faint clicking sound that prickled her skin with cold dread. Ethan sat in the corner of the room, his gaze fixed on the black expanse of forest outside the window. He said nothing, but his eyes refused to turn away. Marjorie almost told him to go to bed, but hesitation froze her tongue. Some irrational fear that if she looked away, even for a heartbeat, something from the darkness would step inside. That night, the nightmare came for Ethan. He dreamed of a forest unfamiliar, where the moon had been devoured and only a pale, sickly glow remained, cast from countless jagged teeth jutting up from the soil. They clattered together in a deafening chorus, a death-rattle symphony without end. From within that forest of teeth, a pair of hollow eyes opened, and slowly, a smile stretched wide, curling grotesquely to the ears. Ethan jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his back slick with cold fear. In town, news spread quickly. A young girl named Janice had vanished along the path leading into the woods. Police launched a search, but all they found was her bloodied backpack and scattered shards of bone, pale as chalk. Sheriff Duane insisted it was the work of wild animals, a bear perhaps or wolves. But those who saw the remains swore the bite marks were too long, too sharp, to belong to any earthly beast. Marjorie joined the search party, and near the trail's edge she found something she could no longer ignore. Nestled among rotting leaves was a tooth, the length of her finger, gleaming as though freshly polished. When she lifted it, it quivered faintly in her hand, alive with some unnatural pulse, and the sound of grinding teeth throbbed directly in her skull. That night, back at the cabin, she placed the two teeth together. They clicked against one another, a brittle rhythm that sounded disturbingly like words in a language beyond human comprehension. Marjorie froze, breath caught in her throat. Ethan entered the room, his face pale, and whispered that he had seen the smile again in his dreams. Without a single word between them, Marjorie understood. The darkness in the forest was no rumor. It was real, and it was reaching for them. After Janice's mysterious death, the small town sank into uneasy silence. Doors were locked before dusk, streets emptied long before the sun was gone. Yet Sheriff Duane clung to his explanation that wild animals were to blame. His words echoed through the loudspeakers in brittle monotony, dry and meaningless. A thin curtain straining to hide the truth, bleeding slowly from the forest. Marjorie knew better. The two teeth in her drawer never ceased their clicking, striking one another in the silence of the room. By night, the sound burrowed straight into her skull, carried on an unseen current that dragged with it fragmented whispers. They spoke of hunger, of a smile widening in the dark. Ethan grew paler with each day, his eyes open wide through the nights, for whenever he dared to close them, he was crushed again by visions of teeth erupting from the earth, hemming him in. One morning, a figure waiting on the porch froze Marjorie in her tracks. It was Richard Cole, an anthropology professor and an old acquaintance from her university years. He had heard that Marjorie had moved here, and more importantly, he had heard of the disappearances. Richard was not surprised. If anything, he seemed to have been expecting it. He opened a worn leather-bound journal, revealing pages filled with faded sketches of a grotesque figure, a gaunt, hunched body, a mouth cleaved nearly across the face, bristling with hundreds of disordered teeth. Richard explained that in the folklore of an ancient tribe once rooted in these lands, there existed a being called Labu. Born of hunger and darkness, it had been sealed beneath the earth through ritual sacrifice. Yet, when that seal weakened, Labu would return, hunting by planting fear and drawing its victims into dreams, where it shredded the soul before ever touching the flesh. Marjorie was struck numb. Ethan's nightmares, the teeth in her possession, everything matched Richard's words. But the most terrifying revelation lay in a line from the old manuscripts. Whoever keeps its teeth shall be the first to be devoured. That night, the grinding no longer came from the drawer. It seeped from the walls, from the floorboards, from the window frames. The wooden house seemed to sprout invisible teeth, clattering against one another in endless hunger. Ethan clutched his head. His scream caught silent in his throat, while his wide eyes reflected a sickly green light from some source unseen. Richard stood frozen, his face ashen, the realization striking him like a blade. Labu was not merely hunting. It had already caught their scent. Outside, the wind ceased. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. From the forest, the clicking rose in a frenzied chorus, a death march rattling through the night, heralding that fear was no longer rumor. It had spread like a plague without form. And at its center, Marjorie's house had become the gathering place for a thing that had waited centuries to wake. That night, the wooden house seemed to transform into a colossal body. Every crack exhaled a clicking rhythm, the sound spreading everywhere like the gnash of 1,000 teeth. Marjorie sat frozen, her fingers clenching the ring of keys, but the whispers seeped into her skull, thick and sticky as sap. They carried no language she recognized, yet their meaning was undeniable. Let us in. Let us taste. Ethan lay curled on the bed, his small frame trembling. His eyes stared wide at the ceiling, where the cracks slowly warped. From the timber, jagged teeth sprouted, lengthening, clattering against one another before breaking loose and falling like hail made of bone. Each piece struck the floor with a high-pitched chime, warped and shrill, like a child's laughter twisted out of shape. Richard Cole scribbled furiously into his journal, sweat streaming down his temple. He muttered of an infiltration stage, the moment when the entity marked its prey. But his words no longer carried knowledge. They read like a death sentence, written out loud in real time. Marjorie rushed to the bed and pulled Ethan into her arms. His body was ice cold, lips tinged blue, his mouth moving faintly. She pressed her ear to him and nearly screamed. Ethan's voice was gone. From his throat came only the rhythmic clatter of teeth, perfectly in sync with the house chorus. Darkness thickened around them, not an ordinary absence of light, but a viscous shroud where twisted forms writhed and pressed against reality. Within it, a grin unfurled, stretching ear to ear, illuminated by a sickly green glow. Labubu did not step through the door. It split out from the air itself, as if the house had been its womb all along. Its hollow eyes fixed upon Ethan. Marjorie felt the pull of an invisible force, wrenching her son from her embrace. His body rose, suspended in the air, while the teeth erupting from the walls angled toward him, clattering like a triumphant hymn for the predator's feast. Richard screamed without sound, scrawling frantic tribal sigils across the floor with chalk. But the markings dissolved instantly, swallowed whole as though licked clean by the dark. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, realizing every fragment of knowledge he carried was nothing, mere scraps of paper before a hunger older than language. Marjorie lunged, gripping Ethan's hand. A green luminescence spread across his skin, veins glowing like half-chewed strands. In his eyes reflected the vision of an endless forest of teeth, waiting to consume his soul. Then, amid the frenzy of grinding jaws, the room filled with a chorus of whispers. No longer vague, but sharp and merciless. He is mine. You will witness. You will surrender. Marjorie felt her blood congeal in her veins. She understood. Labubu had chosen Ethan, and her role here was never chance. She was meant to bear witness, or pay the price to keep her son. Outside, the forest convulsed. Leaves rustled, not with the wind, but with the rhythm of countless unseen teeth, laughing. The cabin shook, planks splitting away to reveal a yawning abyss beneath, as though the earth itself were opening its jaws. In that instant, Marjorie knew the nightmare was no longer Ethan's alone. It had stepped into reality, and nothing could stop it. The house collapsed inward like a cage, its wooden walls splitting apart to reveal massive teeth jutting from the darkness beyond. Labubu emerged, gaunt, hunched, its mouth splitting half its face, lined with hundreds of teeth crowding together, jagged and uneven like a forest of silver blades. Its hollow eyes locked onto Ethan, suspended in the air, his body bathed in a green glow that shone like a beacon of death. Marjorie lunged forward, desperate to wrench her son free from the invisible force. Her fingers brushed his hand, but Ethan's body was dissolving into ash, pulled toward the gnashing maw of the abyss. The whispers thundered now, sharp and merciless. He is mine. You will surrender. Richard fell to his knees, mumbling fragments of ancient incantations, but every word evaporated the instant it left his lips. Human knowledge crumbled against the raw, primal hunger of the beast. All he could do was witness, helpless, as the monstrous mouth yawned open at the center of the room. Marjorie clutched Ethan tightly, her eyes blazing with defiance. From deep within, she understood. To save her child, another soul must be offered, and the only soul left was her own. Teeth rained around them, gleaming like a storm of knives. She drew one last breath, whispering into her son's ear, "Live." With the final strength in her body, Marjorie thrust Ethan out of the green radiance, hurling him into Richard's arms. At that instant, she was lifted, dragged straight into Labu's gaping mouth. Her scream was swallowed whole, merging with the relentless clatter of teeth as the house convulsed like a body choking down the last trace of light. Then, silence. The cabin stood still, lifeless. Ethan lay unconscious in Richard's embrace. Marjorie was gone, leaving only a void of cold air. At the center of the ruined floor, One long tooth still glowed, pulsing faintly, clicking in a steady rhythm, like the breath of something asleep, waiting. Richard carried Ethan from the cabin, never daring to look back. Yet in the forest's darkness, the sound continued, grinding teeth, unbroken, endless. Labubu had retreated, but it had not vanished. It was waiting for the next hand to pick up the tooth that remained. And when that moment came, the cycle would begin again. Ainun, Parwa. In the small town of Vermont, winter smothers every street beneath a suffocating veil of snow, yet its silence conceals an ancient dread. They whisper that if, at midnight, one hears the faint clatter of grinding teeth within the walls, then by dawn someone will be found lifeless, face frozen, lips stretched wide into a grotesque smile. No blood, no wound, only an emptiness too terrifying to name. They call it the Mark of Labubu, the final smile from which no soul has ever escaped. Pendi, Wendeli, Andau, Anhau, Andi, Capstay. Winter in Vermont draped the land in a blinding pall of white, drowning the town in a silence so deep it seemed frozen in place. On that morning, with frost still clinging to the windowsills, they discovered the body of Mrs. Helen Morris in her weathered wooden house at the edge of town. The door had been left unlocked. Nothing inside was disturbed. The fireplace still glowed faintly with dying embers, and a teacup rested beside the armchair, its contents long since gone cold. Yet what made the blood run cold was not the tranquility of the scene, but her face. Helen's lips had been pulled so wide they seemed to split her countenance, twisted into a grotesque smile, as if forced open by an unseen hand. The corners of her mouth were torn, yet no blood marked the wound. Her eyes stared upward, glassy and vacant, fixed on an eternity no one else could see. Her body remained intact, without the faintest trace of struggle, a statue of flesh arranged to grin forever. The neighbor later recalled that the night before her death, Helen had complained of strange noises in the wooden walls. Like teeth gnashing, she whispered, but no one paid attention. Now, within the house, as neighbors gathered in uneasy silence, some swore they could still hear that faint, clattering sound seeping from the cracks in the ceiling. The town sheriff quickly dismissed it as an unusual death caused by stroke. None dared to argue, yet those who had looked upon Helen's face could not bear to look again. The photograph of her body was hidden away almost immediately, for even a single glimpse was enough to make one's stomach knot with dread. By the following day, word had spread across town. Some whispered of the old curse, handed down through generations. When the hollow smile appears, the soul has already been taken. Others clung desperately to reason, murmuring of rare illnesses or mass hysteria. But in the nights that followed, when the wind died and the silence deepened, families began to hear it. The faint grinding of unseen teeth inside their walls. And all who heard it thought of Helen's face, her endless smile, and the eyes that seemed still to follow the living with a hollow, eternal gaze. Oh, Unviewable. The death of Helen Morris had not yet faded from memory when the town was struck by another shock. Only a week later, the familiar grocer, Richard Palmer, was found lifeless behind his counter. He sat slumped in his swivel chair, one hand resting upon his ledger. No signs of struggle, not a trace of blood, only that same twisted visage, lips stretched into a brittle, unnatural smile.
I can't stay here.
Drawn so taut it seemed the skin might tear apart. The whispers grew louder. Some still muttered of coincidence, but disbelief crumbled when, inside the local schoolhouse, a teacher was discovered collapsed at her desk. She too sat upright, eyes frozen open, her face marked by that grotesque grin. 3 deaths, each body untouched, each face smiling. No one could cling to reason any longer. Unease thickened over the town like a second winter. With every nightfall, the people listened to their walls, holding their breath against the faintest disturbance, dreading the sound of something stirring where no living thing should be. In this oppressive silence, Eleanor Finch, a widow in her 40s, began to notice strange occurrences within her own home. At first, it was only faint clicks within the walls, like metal striking metal. She dismissed it as vermin or the sigh of old pipes. But her son, Daniel, whispered that he heard something more. Laughter, low and disembodied, drifting through his room each night. Sleep deserted her. Eleanor began recording every detail in a small notebook. The time the noises began, the place from which they seemed to echo, the unnatural chill that seeped through cracks in the wooden walls. And with every page, a dreadful realization grew clearer. Each victim had spoken of such sounds days before their deaths. The home that once promised safety now became a silent snare. In the late hours, Eleanor sat rigid in the dark, listening to the dry, relentless grinding of teeth moving through the walls, as though some colossal maw waited patiently to swallow her family whole. And she understood then. The hollow smile was no longer just the misfortune of neighbors. It was advancing, step by step, click by click, toward her very own door. I know. Eleanor sought answers in a place long abandoned by most, the old library at the center of town. Its halls were silent, but for the creak of ancient wood, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and the dust that lay thick upon every shelf. As she sifted through crumbling records, her hands brushed against a small volume bound in darkened leather, a forgotten journal belonging to a minister of the 18th century. The yellowed pages chronicled a time of horror. The town had once endured a mysterious plague of smiles. People collapsed in droves, their bodies untouched, their faces frozen in hollow grins. The minister wrote that it was no illness, but rather the work of a thing awakened from the earth. He named it the bringer of smiles, a gaunt silhouette, whose endless teeth ground together in the night. Eleanor closed the book, her heart pounding. She realized she had stumbled upon a secret the town had chosen to bury. Yet, a deeper fear gnawed within her. If the curse had risen once, then it could rise again. That night, the dreams began. She saw her own familiar room drowned in darkness, and in the corner stood a figure, thin, motionless, its face blurred save for the gaping grin carved across it, wide enough to split its head in two. From that smile came the grinding of unseen teeth, a constant, merciless rattle that filled the air. She woke drenched in cold sweat, only to hear the same dry clatter seeping from the walls, as though the dream had followed her into waking life. Daniel, too, began to change. The boy grew pale and hollow-eyed, restless with sleepless nights. One morning, Eleanor froze in terror as she found her son smiling in his sleep. It was no expression of innocence, but a rigid, grotesque imitation of the dead. When she called his name, he gave no answer, only the faint, unconscious gnash of teeth echoing through the room. Horror welled up within her, and yet she understood. This was no accident, no coincidence. The smile was a mark, a sign that her child had been touched by something no human eye could meet. And in the silence of that house, as the beams groaned beneath an unseen weight, Eleanor grasped the truth. The others had only been the beginning. The curse had returned, and now it was reaching for her family. Kelly. Pa. In Seo. U. And Toru. In the days after discovering the ancient journal, Eleanor lived in a state of unbearable strain. By day, the town slumbered beneath a veil of quiet snow. But when night descended, her house became a hollow chamber, echoing with dreadful sounds. At first, it was only a few scattered clicks from the wooden panels. Yet with each passing night, the noises multiplied, spreading through the halls, along the ceilings, into the bedrooms. They were not the creaks of timber, but the slow, grinding rasp of teeth. Thousands of them, clenching and scraping together, each movement drawn out as if to torment the nerves of anyone who dared to listen. Eleanor soon noticed strange fissures creeping across the walls. They did not split like ordinary cracks. Instead, they curved into arcs, bending like hidden rows of teeth embedded deep in the wood. She struck them with a hammer, desperate to break the illusion. But each time she did, new fissures appeared elsewhere, even along the ceiling, as though the house itself was sprouting a jaw of its own. Daniel was withering. He no longer ate, no longer spoke, but sat for hours unmoving, his eyes dulled and opaque. One night, Eleanor entered his room and found him seated stiffly on the bed, eyes wide but empty. His face had contorted, lips stretching into an unnaturally long smile. When she touched his shoulder, a sound erupted from his mouth, the hideous gnash of teeth grinding together, inhuman, resonant, and cold. Eleanor wept, clutching her son to her chest. But when she lifted her gaze, she froze. On the wall behind him, a shadow had taken form, gaunt, elongated, its head cocked to one side, as though sharing in Daniel's smile. Its mouth gaped open, revealing jagged rows of teeth, clattering in rhythm with the sound spilling from her child. The room grew icy, her breath clouding the air in pale wisps. She staggered backward, trembling, but the shadow did not fade. It only stood, tilting its head, its grin endless and hollow. Every candle in the house sputtered out at once, plunging the room into a suffocating black. From within that dark, the gnashing rose, layer upon layer, until it seemed the entire house had become a single vast mouth, waiting to swallow them whole. When the lights flared back, Daniel collapsed onto the bed, unconscious. The shadow had vanished, yet the smile remained etched upon his face, warped and unyielding, a scar carved into living flesh. Eleanor understood then. It was far too late to hope for help from the outside. What she had witnessed no longer belonged to this world. She had only one choice left, to confront the nightmare itself before it devoured the soul of her son. Outside, snow fell in heavy silence, yet within Eleanor's house the cold was sharper, crueler. That night, as the clock struck 12, the entire house shuddered as though something beneath had stirred awake. The cracks along the walls widened all at once, aligning into vast rows of teeth, opening like a monstrous jaw. From the fissures poured a grinding cacophony, relentless and deafening, the sound of something long imprisoned rising to the surface. Daniel lay motionless on the bed, his face warped by an unearthly smile that split his features wide. His breath came faint and shallow, but his eyes remained open, fixed on the dense blackness gathering in the corner of the room. Eleanor knelt beside him, clutching his icy hand. "I'm here, my son," she whispered, her voice quivering. Yet Daniel's lips only twitched with that lifeless grin, no words returning to her. Then the darkness began to move. From the fractures in the wall, a gaunt shape dragged itself forth. Its head bowed low, its arms long enough to scrape the floor. And when it lifted its face, Eleanor saw the void-wide grin. Mouth split ear to ear, endless teeth clashing in a ceaseless grind that froze her blood. It was him, the bringer of smiles. Labubu. Eleanor felt her will unravel beneath its gaze. In her mind, whispers slithered, hypnotic and cruel. "Smile, and I will take your soul." Her lips trembled. Muscles tugged at her cheeks against her will. She tried to turn away, but the shadow had filled the room, its presence pressing down upon her from every corner. In the storm of her despair, Eleanor remembered the minister's journal. A single line had glimmered through the haze of dread. Only a sacrifice born of love can halt the hollow smile. She understood then. To save Daniel, she would give what no one else could. She pulled her son into her arms and lifted her gaze to the entity. "If you must take a soul, take mine," she cried, her voice rising above the grinding roar. "But let the boy go." Labubu tilted its head. Its grin widened, as though it had been waiting for this invitation since time began. It lunged forward, its maw yawning like an abyss. Eleanor shut her eyes, clutching Daniel tight, surrendering to the tide of darkness. The gnashing ceased. Silence swallowed the house. When Daniel opened his eyes, his body shook and tears burst forth. But the arms that had held him were gone. Eleanor was no longer there. On the wooden floor, at the spot where she had knelt, lay a single tooth, long, gleaming like metal, shining cold in the dim light. Daniel cried out for her, again and again, but the house gave no answer. The silence was heavy, as though nothing had ever happened at all. Yet, deep within the walls, faint and steady, a sound endured, the distant grind of unseen teeth, whispering that the hollow smile had not ended. "Nen,"